How is everybody? Thank you for joining us. If you don't know me, I'm Tara. I am the lead Nexus provider with Telemedica, and we've been coming to you monthly or throughout the month talking about different medical topics that affect you as veterans and Nexus letters, and try to give you a little bit more of education or insight from a medical perspective. This month, we're talking, and we've been talking and posting a lot about medical and mental health connections because it's Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And so today, I wanted to come on live and talk a little bit deeper, specifically focusing on the role that weight gain and obesity has in this process, because it's such a key and important factor in so many secondary cases with VA disability claims. And I wanted to make sure that I devoted enough time to give you a good overview so that if you don't know anything about it, it gets those wheels turning. And if you do know a little bit about it, but maybe you might not exactly understand the concepts enough to really move your case forward, I'm hoping you get a few things from this broadcast. So I'm going to cover 4 things today. 1, the VA regulation on obesity as an intermediate step. Secondly, I'll be talking about the science behind why mental health conditions contribute to obesity. Third, we'll be going over some common medical mental health connections. And lastly, we're going over a few pro tips about how these connections, about these specific connections and the evidence that's needed to maximize your success with VA disability claims. So we're going to jump right into the first learning point, which is what the VA considers obesity as an intermediate step. So according to the 38 CFR, so the Code of Federal Regulations, is what all VA disability, as well as other things, are related to. So we always refer to 38 CFR. You will hear me say, geez, I can't talk today. You will hear me say this over and over and over and over again if you watch us a lot. And so sorry to be a broken record, but I never know when someone's joining us for the first time. So I'd like to always just make sure that that is clear versus going through the entire broadcast and going, what is that 38 something? So the Code of Federal Regulation, we always refer back to what the VA is doing, because as we all know, there are good results, bad results, good people, bad people. We like to keep it to the regs, just like military, there's a regulation for everything and it's black and white, plain as day. And yes, the concepts might be a little bit abstract at times. There's usually at least some direction in the regulation. So we always like to refer everything back to that because that's the basis of building a strong claim. So in relation to obesity as an intermediate step, the regulation talks about 3 key things. And this is where a lot of people get tripped up when it comes to filing their claims. So those 3 things are: the disability must have caused the veteran to become obese. So your service-connected disability must have caused you to become obese. The second key concept is the obesity must have been a substantial factor in causing the secondary disability. So if you're trying to connect a condition, your service-connected condition, to another condition, using obesity as an intermediate step, you have to prove those points. The third point that needs to be proven is that the secondary condition would not have likely occurred if not for the obesity that was caused by the service-connected condition. So that's a little bit tangled up. So it's really easy to just think that you're connecting the dots. So your service-connected condition is the first dot, and then obesity is in the middle, and then the third dot is that secondary. You really have to show that connection. You have to show that linear line, and it doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be, I know we talk a lot about causation, and I know in previous posts I've talked about causation versus aggravation, but this particular regulation talks a lot about in a leans heavily towards the causation side. And so it doesn't have to be black and white, clear as day, but you do have to rule out other things. So you have to take into consideration all the factors that's causing the obesity and sort of try to figure out where the substantial factor is. That's the key word there, that the obesity is a substantial factor in causing that secondary disability. You also have to make sure that your service connecting condition is one of the primary reasons why you've had the obesity and the weight gain. And if you keep those things in mind, it'll be easier for you to gather that evidence for your VA disability claim, because what proof, you can ask yourself these questions. What proof do I have that my service connected condition causes obesity? What proof do I have that obesity causes this other condition? Now, this is where it can get very tricky and complicated. And so, having a medical expert team, such as Telemedica's Nexus team, help out with this really does, or even your treating doctor, if they are willing to make these connections and sort of show this in a Nexus letter from your treating doctor. This is where we really shine and help showing the VA your connection, because we have to relate this back to you as well. So this is why when we do a lot of our chart reviews, we ask for a lot of this information. Do you have any visits with nutrition? Do you have any evidence of exercise programs that have failed? Do you have any mental health notes that talk about how this plays a role? So we ask for a lot of this information when we're trying to figure out to connect the dots. So it's something that you can definitely do at home, and you can definitely start thinking about with your own cases if you just outline those three key concepts and connect the dots and ask yourself those questions. How does my situation apply, and how can I prove it? Because that's important. As much as I love buddy letters and personal statements, it is definitely enhances a claim. But in these types of cases, the more objective evidence that you have, the better your chances are going to be. So most of the time, what trips veterans up is one of these factors are off or not adequately represented in the evidence that's submitted, and that's where a denial is likely to occur. Not that you don't have that connection, it's just the VA is not seeing that clear connect the dots situation. So hopefully that cleared that up a little bit with the obesity as an intermediate step with how the VA sees it. Now, moving on to the science behind mental health conditions causing obesity. So, the body's response to mental distress will cause the release of hormones and neurochemicals, and they can trigger this big cascade of events that happens in your body. And it's not important to know all the specific details, all the specific chemicals and the processes. That's more for the medical team to really dive into that. But really, if you think about it, it's your fight or flight response. Most people have heard of that stress can cause your body to go into that. If you think about even recent events, even if you don't have a mental health condition, you're a family member, trying to help your veteran relative, and you may not be experiencing that mental distress yourself, but to understand what that does to your body, if you think about even with recent events, as of even yesterday, the hurricane in Florida, I have family in Florida, a lot of Telemedica staff, we do have people in Florida as well, and everybody can attest to you, and I personally can attest to you that yesterday was not a great day for me. I had a lot of stress. I had a lot of worry and concern, and felt all of these effects that I think a lot of our veterans feel on a regular basis in the relationship to their own mental health struggles, whether that's depression, anxiety, PTSD. These things are real and it affects you. I was drained. I couldn't focus on anything. I had a hard time really getting my thoughts out or gathering my thoughts, communicating with others differently than I normally felt like I was. I had a lot of tension in my body. I had a tension headache. I felt just tired, drained. My diet was off. My motivation was off. It affected every part of my body, affected every system, every interaction I had. And that's, if you think about it, how our veterans feel when they're dealing with this mental distress. And I don't think we often seek care for it. And that's where some of this documentation is lacking, is that we don't always go to the doctor and tell our doctor or a mental health provider about this episode. I sure didn't have a conversation with anyone, I'm having it with all of you right now, but I don't think it's common to do that. And that's something that can be helpful, is getting that out, getting it documented, because it really can be hard to show how much distress you're in if it's not written down anywhere. Um, so what does I talked about all these body functions. So I'm going to kind of go in a little bit more detail in relation to this. So stress can alter in relation to body weight, how it affects body weight. So stress can alter your body weight, the regulation mechanisms, metabolism. So it impacts those areas of the brain that trigger your body and are responsible for like fat storage. So it tells your body you're in this fight or flight response. It tells your body to hold on to everything, slow down your metabolism. You hold on and store fat because we don't know what we're getting into. Our body's revving up for a fight. And so, that being the case, it works against your efforts for losing weight in diet. And I know that's not a concept that is far fetched or something that medical providers don't get. They're just not thinking about it, and they're not thinking about it when they're evaluating you for these conditions. And sometimes writing these things out in your personal statement or having evidence of it with your having conversations with your doctors at your doctor's visits can be helpful to really outline what's causing your condition and what's triggering it, what's the factor. And so stressful situations can also, like I said, go and push your body into that survival mode, store more fat. No matter how much exercise you do, that interferes. There is a level of interference that it has that's outside of what is considered normal, whatever that is in the mind of those evaluators. Other negative effects of mental health conditions include sleep disruption. So, this could be in the form of true insomnia, where you're not getting more than a couple of hours of sleep at night, where you can't get to sleep or you can't stay asleep. Fragmented sleep, where you sleep for short durations and you wake up frequently, you're tossing and turning all night. Those sleep disruptions or fragmentations, they have the same effects as stress on your body. They wear you down, they cause a lot of release of these chemicals, cortisol and other neurochemicals that really just promote fat storage and prevent you from being as healthy as you can be. The direct effects of mental health conditions can be seen a little bit more obviously on appetite regulation or the motivation to exercise. You may not feel like getting out of bed. You may not feel like doing that, trying to go to the gym or even swim in your pool. You have a pool or something, you just have lack that motivation. Or it might trigger the opposite. It might trigger you to seek comfort foods, high density, calorie dense foods that we don't want to label them as bad, but foods that are just highly processed. They taste good, you crave them, they trigger that happiness center in your brain. And it just, when you're feeling at your worst, that is what you're going to turn to. You're not going to go snack on a zucchini. You're not going to go get some celery or grill some chicken or do anything that is healthy. You're going to want to crave those other things. And so that interferes with your ability to lose weight. And that is a real thing. Eating disorders, that's along the lines of what I consider eating disorders. It may not formally fit the criteria for a diagnosis with a mental health provider for an eating disorder, but it definitely contributes significantly to the weight that you're putting on and the ability to lose it. So those things are important to get documented as well, and they play a role. The less thought about mechanisms that I want to touch on lastly about this is relating to substance abuse, specifically alcohol consumption. It's excess calories. So it does a lot of things. One, it's excess calories. No matter, even if you're drinking the most calorie conscious item, it still is excess calories that you don't need. It does nothing good for your body. It lowers your metabolism. It affects your sleep. It also reduces your desire and ability to function. You don't feel like exercising. Who goes out and has a couple of beers and then decides, hey, I'm going to go hit the gym hard? Like, most people don't. Usually leads to increased hunger triggers and those comfort foods I just talked about. So all of those things play a role when you consider the effects of mental health conditions. One last thing I forgot. Lastly, medications. There are some side effects of medications that can cause weight gain. And this is a little bit of a controversial subject matter because most of them we're talking about are antidepressant medications. There are some studies, but then there are also studies saying that weight gain is limited. So it's not the only contributing factor. It is a contributing factor. It can help tip the scales. If you're adding all these different things up, yes, it could weigh, really increase the amount of factors that your mental health condition is affecting your weight rather than other conditions when you're weighing them out and trying to see which fall into which basket. But it's not the sole factor. It's not the only thing, and it's not for long-term situations, such as someone would expect with a medication like a corticosteroid. People who are on chronic um, prednisone, for instance, high doses, not talking little low dose, high doses of prednisone for long periods of time, not just little bursts from when you get treated for asthma or a cold or something that you're getting treated for. High doses for long periods of time can be associated with some weight gain. But medications that mental health conditions are treated for can also do that as well. But like I said, it's a smaller contributing factor, but it's still, everything adds up. So think about these, all the factors that affect you. The third thing I want to talk a little bit about are common mental health and medical connections. Sleep apnea is big. We talk about that. We do a lot of those types of cases. Most of those connections are through this obesity as an intermediate step, or the sleep fragmentation, sleep deprivation. So that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I touched so much before, just earlier on, that those mechanisms. And most of the time you're not thinking about how they're connected and how they trigger, and neither are the VA doctors and raters. They're not always thinking about all the factors that are contributing, what's causing what, how are these lines connected. Headache conditions. A way that mental health conditions impact headache conditions is through lowering the pain threshold. So your mental distress just lowers the bar on when a trigger happens. So it doesn't cause the headaches, and it just lowers the bar. So if your migraine headache, so if you think on a scale of 1 to 10, without mental distress, it takes you to a 10 to get to that severe migraine headache. Now, in mental distress, when you have chronic mental distress, what you experience is that bar is now lowered from 10 to maybe 7 or 5. And so it only takes you to get to 5 or 7 to trigger that migraine headache, to trigger that tension headache. And so that's what we look at when we're looking at these connections. We look at those triggers. So tracking your headache conditions, tracking your triggers, tracking what factors and what's going on in your life when that happens, because that's the mechanism. So you're getting in more frequent headaches because, or more severe headaches that last longer, because the bar is lowered. And that's what we need to highlight when we talk about these cases. GERD and IBS, the GI system, think about it. There's a lot of new research out there focusing on the microbiome. So all of these neurochemicals and cascades and stress hormones have a negative effect on the permeability, or how much things can seep in and out of the GI system, and how that system actually moves waste through the body. Same thing with the GERD, with the sphincter. If you're having a lot more severe episodes of GERD, it could be because those chemical triggers from the mental distress could be affecting how well that sphincter is holding that stomach juice in there. So they can be affected. Erectile dysfunction, sexual arousal disorder for females. That can be things like medication side effects. Also in acid reflux or IBS can be medication side effects as well, but medication side effects. You also got to think about in mental distress, this can interrupt your brain signals to the body to physiologically. Brain signals the body for blood flow to the genitals. That's how that works. That can be disrupted by mental distress. Just that physical trigger can be. The veteran population also experiences more anger, hostility, numbness, emotional avoidance, withdrawnness, intrusive thoughts. All of those things can affect intimacy in different ways. And so there are a lot of reasons why you can have those intimacy issues in relation to mental health conditions. So those are some of our top 4 common connections, and a little bit about the mechanisms that we typically see with those. I now want to go into some pro tips. So I talked a little bit throughout this whole broadcast, a little bit about these things, but I just kind of want to sum them up in a more specific way. So when I talk about ways that you can help your case, we talk about tracking triggers. So if your condition has gotten worse or is not getting better with treatment, you start thinking, why is that? What am I doing? keep a diary, keep a log. What is going on in my life? What am I eating? Am I taking my medication? Is there any outside factors that's contributing? How do I feel mentally today when this is happening? And I know that can be hard on the day of, but sometimes maybe the next day you can reflect back and think back on the day before. What happened? What was going on? And over time, you can track common patterns. Now, this tracking can be used in support of your case. You can submit that tracking log to the VA. We can summarize it in a nexus letter. You can then pull out all of the triggering factors. And for instance, for GERD, you can say, wow, I don't get acid reflux around food. So food is not my trigger. I get acid reflux when I'm worried and stressed and my anxiety is off the charts, when something is going on in my life and it just throws me into chaos. That is an important factor when we're talking about these connections, because it's not the same for everybody. Everybody is unique and different, and you need to track your own triggers, because one case does not always mean it affects or it can be applied to you. So tracking triggers is huge. Second is seeking medical care. We talked about a little bit about that, to have all your symptoms documented correctly. It may not always be convenient, or it may not always be on your mind, but definitely making sure you mention these things to your treating providers can help you in documenting your case, because I'm sure they're happening to you. And if you just slow down and actually think about it, it affects us all. It affects everybody. And you don't always, life is so busy and fast nowadays, you don't always think about these things. So purposefully sitting down to think can do two things. One, gather all your evidence correctly, but also it can actually help you your mental health. It can help you really break up and figure out what happened in your life today, what affected it, how can I make this better, how can I prevent this from happening tomorrow. Are there any tools that I might be able to reach for and use in relation to this? So this can be a helpful in multiple different ways, also in self-treatment and self-care, but also for documenting your case. Another thing is ruling out other causes from your medical history. That's a huge tip. I talked a little bit about erectile dysfunction. There are other causes medically that are primary causes. High blood pressure is one of them. If you have high blood pressure and you're trying to connect this, you think that your mental distress is triggering and causing this, we have to see documentation that your blood pressure is well controlled, that you're taking your medication, that your most recent visits are showing good blood pressure measurements, because that's going to help your case in the aggravation of your condition. Now, there are some nitty-gritty things about the physiological effects of high blood pressure on the blood vessel structures in the genital area. I'm not going to get in the weeds about this, but there are some effects of like having chronic issues there. But if you're showing that your blood pressure is controlled, it does highlight that your trigger is this, because if you've had high blood pressure for 15, 20 years and you only had erectile dysfunction for the last 2 years, and the last 2 years your mental health condition has deteriorated, that connects the dots. So talk about pro tips, connect the dots. If you outline it, literally write it out on a piece of paper. How does one affect the other? What is the timeline of things? So timelining out things also can be helpful when you're talking about this. Lastly, talking about something related to denials that we see when it comes to obesity as an intermediate step. A common phrase and a common concept we see from the VA a lot is obesity is a combination of calories taken in and exercise efforts to burn off those calories. Mental health conditions don't preclude you from doing any form of exercise or all forms of exercise. I can just ramble off all of these things. They're standard phrases that we see all the time in denial letters. And that's a very simplified way of looking at things. I hope I highlighted today that this is a complex, complicated concept that has lots of different factors. And that phrase is short-sighted. The phrase of limiting it to calories in and calories out is true of an individual who has no medical problems or mental health issues or mental distress. When you factor in mental distress, it's a whole new ballgame. There are so many other processes going on in your body that is just too simplified of a version. And I think it's really not thinking through and evaluating the veteran's case fully. And some of that you can help yourself by getting that documentation I talked about. documenting with your doctor's visits, documenting with your mental health providers. It may not always be comfortable or convenient, but it's important. Documenting your triggers, tracking your progress, all of those things are going to help your case. Sometimes we have veterans who get connected very easily. You'll see it all over Facebook. You'll see it all over these groups. I walked into the VA, didn't even have a diagnosis, and I got 100% P&T. I am so happy for you if that's you. That is not the case for most veterans. That is not the path that happens. Most of the time, you don't seek care for one reason or another. You don't get service treatment records because it's not a thing back in the day to do that, to get medical care when you're in service. You suck it up and you move on. You're in the field, all these other reasons. And so we have to get creative when we're connecting these. And a lot of the times we have to use these methods, a couple months of tracking, a couple months of seeking medical care. This is not a fast process when it comes to VA service connection and disability. Sometimes you have to go to the VA Board of Appeals. That's a long process, but sometimes it's important. I've seen some recent denials that are just horrendous, that are just so sad to hear the VA do this to veterans because they discount things so negligently. It's so obvious. And I've seen so many VA Board of Appeals cases that overturn this in a second. But the fact that the veteran has to go through that process of denial, higher level review, supplemental claim, denial, repeat, rinse and repeat, and then VA Board of Appeals, we're talking years later. It's just disgusting. It's disgusting that it's not taken more seriously and that care is not taken to really do this right, to really look at that veteran's case in every aspect and really identify what the triggers are, listen to them and hear the story out and put themselves in your place. Yes, I understand that you might not seek medical care. And yes, 20 years without seeking medical care is harder to prove than 5 years. But you really have to see the human element of it. You really have to put yourself in the veteran's shoes and really go down all those rabbit holes and think about all those different connections. But these, I hope, are tips that can help you, help your case, help us if we're involved. Because sometimes cases can be tricky. And they may not be thinking, outside of the box of cause and effect or things that they were taught in medical school. And so sometimes we have to really show them the connection. And so this is where we shine as Telemedica, that we shine as a private company that have expertise in this. We pride ourselves on being an expert in trying to understand all the possible contributing factors, staying up on top of the research in order to be as successful as possible, in order to take all the evidence you have and try to connect those dots, try to make that line as clear as possible. It's not something that's necessary. Nexus letters are not required. I try to say this at the end of all of my videos because you are not required to have this document. You can do this on your own and collect all the evidence. Sometimes Nexus letters do help. It's a proven fact. It can help make your case easier, faster, and at a higher percentage rate. It's just, we've seen it done over and over and over again with many, many veterans over the years. And it is something you have to look at. Is it beneficial in your case? You may be able to do this without the need of an Nexus letter, but sometimes some situations might really have that benefit of that document. So evaluate your situation before jumping into that it is a serious decision, and it does cost a lot. We recognize it costs a lot, and we take that very seriously, which is why we like to come on and give you as much help and information as possible, but we take your case as seriously as possible. And we pride ourselves at being those experts at trying to dig down every hole we can and at least give you an honest opinion when we do a chart review of the success rate of this case. We can't give you a percentage, but we can tell you if it's a weak case. We can tell you if you have a lot of holes in your story, if that line is blurry. That's what we like to at least to give you some insight into your situation, because this doesn't work for everybody. Not every veteran has mental health connections to another condition. It doesn't apply. It's not one size fits all. So if it does apply to you, we definitely can help with a Nexus letter if needed. So definitely, if you'd like to reach out to us, you can reach us by email, by phone number, or through our website. I think if we can post that in contact information up. I'd like to also open this up if we have any questions. And so if anyone has any questions, feel free. If you're not sure or you come across this and it's not live, please definitely don't hesitate to post comments because we do check back and we will answer those questions. But if you want to know how to get a hold of, like I said, Telemedica, the Medical Nexus team, you can reach us multiple different ways by, like I said, calling or visiting our website, and there's the information up on the screen. Lastly, I wanted to remind you that, I got one just popped in. I'm sorry, I'm watching the comments here. Amitriptyline and weight gain. Yes, you can have, like I said, medications that can contribute to weight gain. It is going to be a minor factor if you consider major and minor factors. And so minor factors, I consider them any and all medications. It's a possibility because if you ever looked up a medication side effect list, try it. It'd be so much fun. Type in Tylenol and look at the side effects of Tylenol. You're going to see hundreds of side effects. It's every medication when they do drug trials, that anything that anyone in the trial had, they count it as a potential side effect and it gets listed. So that's where medication side effects I consider as a minor factor. It could throw you out of balance for many different ways and can contribute, but not definitely a primary only single factor. So yes, we like to consider all medications as potentials. Lori posted, I got a fibromyalgia diagnosis from a doctor. Would a Nexus letter still be a good idea? I'm working today and getting the diagnosis. So fibromyalgia depends on the connections. So fibromyalgia is very common when we're talking about presumptive conditions and Gulf War service. It's one of those Southwest Asia theater presumptive conditions. So not if it's a presumptive condition, a Nexus letter may or may not help. It just depends on your evidence. And so, and what the regulation says when it comes to that. If you're looking at it as a secondary condition to another condition, sometimes a Nexus letter can be more helpful in those cases. Generally, if it's hard to connect the dots, that's how I always like the simplified version of my answer is always, if you can easily connect the dots and the evidence causation really, really connects the dots clearly through the evidence you have, you probably won't have much trouble. A Nexus letter may not be really helpful in your case. Sometimes, yes, it can be helpful if that connection is a little bit fuzzier in the research, if it's not a clear connection medically, that can be difficult. And so Nexus letters sometimes can be helpful in that. But if we're talking a presumptive condition, just like any of the other presumptive conditions, the information about presumptive conditions are on the VA website. The easiest way I get there, because there's a lot of ads. If you go onto Google and you type in VA disability, or you try to get to Southwest Asia Theater or presumptive service connections, things like that, sometimes you can be inundated with a page or two of ads. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure we do ads too. I'm sure at Telemedica, but I see a ton of them. And so if you really want to get to the right VA site, normally what I type into Google and I tell people to type in is talk about exposure. So VA, you want to talk about chemical exposure, burn pit exposure, those type of words seem to get that, those combinations of words seem to get the actual VA site up to the top of the list. And so that is something that I can usually get to that way. Now, what I'm going to do after I sign off here in a couple of minutes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my quick search the way I usually do, and I'm going to grab that site and I'm going to then we'll have it posted in the chat box here that gets you to like that presumptive site from the VA that you can then toggle on the left-hand side. You can toggle onto the different exposures like Southwest Asia, Gulf War, chemical exposures, the new particulate matter stuff, the PACT Act. There's also, I think, information on there. It's been a while since I've been on that VA website. I think there's information on there about, might link you right directly to the page about aid in attendance and other very helpful pieces of information. I think that one jumping off point is very helpful, and I just find it very hard to get to just by searching general terms with the VA, because you get so many ads that pop up. So as much as law firms and folks like us and any other source comes up is helpful to find, it's not what you're looking for. If you're looking for the VA site, sometimes can be hard. And if you just go to va.gov, sometimes it can be hard to navigate, or even type in VA disability and you actually get to one of the landing pages at the VA. Sometimes it still can be hard to get to that one site that I'm specifically talking about. So I'll have them post that into the chat here in just a couple of minutes to help you all out. But if there are no other questions, I'd like to end this with just saying that, if you or someone else that is suffering with a mental health condition and it's beyond your capabilities at the moment, you're trying coping mechanisms and you're just going down that route, please reach out for help. Dial 988. There's no shame or failure in asking it for help. We all need it at some point. Everybody. Whether you have a mental health condition or not, you need help at some point from somebody. It may not be the National Suicide Hotline or Crisis Line, but you might. And if you do, take it seriously, take care of each other. And I have one last question that came in. Sal, you beat the buzzer. All right. Dermatitis, psoriasis, secondary to mental health. Yes. Mental distress, when it comes to skin conditions like psoriasis and dermatitis, you're going to get more frequent outbreaks. You're going to get it to be more severe. It may be less responsive to medication treatment. It's a very similar mechanism as what I talked about throughout this post. The medical what happens with mental distress, where it triggers your body and all of those cascade of events, also applies to other medical conditions and skin conditions like dermatitis and psoriasis are one of them. There are hundreds of triggers and hundreds of connections to mental health conditions with those same mechanisms. So I know we talked a lot about obesity as an immediate step. I know we talked about a couple of connections that are common, but it can affect so many other conditions, and the mechanisms are all about the same. So those same chemicals. So think about that when you think about your medical conditions as well. All right. Well, y'all have a great day. Thank you for joining us. And we'll get some new information out for next month as well. Not sure what the topic is going to be just yet, but stay tuned, because we will put out information as we figure out what we're going to be talking about here. So y'all have a great day. Take care.